music hall was alive with whispers and soft laughter, a buzzing excitement that seemed to float through the air. People of all ages had come to see the famous singer, a man whose name alone drew crowds from miles around. He had a reputation not only for his extraordinary voice but also for his pride, a confidence that often crossed into arrogance. That evening, the hall glimmered under the warm light of chandeliers, the polished wooden floors reflecting the eager faces of the audience. Everyone had taken their seats, some clutching programs tightly, others leaning forward in anticipation, ready to witness a night of music they would never forget. At the far side of the stage, a woman quietly carried her sheet music and adjusted the piano bench. She was not a public figure, nor did she command attention with flashy outfits or bold gestures. Her hair was tied back simply, her clothes plain, and her eyes calm but focused. She had spent years practicing in small, quiet rooms, dreaming of moments like this. The hall was grand, intimidating even, but she breathed steadily, placing her hands gently on the piano keys, feeling the smooth wood under her fingertips. Despite the crowd, despite the grandeur, she felt a strange sense of peace. Music had always been her comfort, her way to express what words could not. As the lights dimmed slightly and the audience settled into quiet anticipation, the famous singer stepped onto the stage. The applause was immediate and loud, echoing through the hall. He wore an air of confidence, almost bordering on arrogance, as if he owned every note of music and every gaze in the room. He waved at the crowd with a charming smile, the kind that made people forget any annoyance at his pride, even if only for a moment. Then, his eyes landed on the woman at the piano. A slow, amused smirk spread across his face. He leaned slightly toward the audience and said, with a tone meant to amuse, "And here we have someone brave enough to attempt the piano before my performance. Let's see if courage alone is enough." A ripple of laughter followed. Some people chuckled politely, unsure if the singer's words were meant in jest, or if they carried the sting of mockery. The woman did not react visibly. She looked down at her music, positioning her hands over the keys, her fingers hovering for a brief moment before touching the first notes. Her heart raced, but she refused to show it. Every second in that hall had led to this moment, and she would not allow anyone's ridicule to shake her. The singer, noticing her composed demeanor, tilted his head, clearly intrigued. He had mocked many performers before, seeing it as part of the entertainment, but there was something different about her. She did not respond with anger, embarrassment, or defiance. She simply prepared, quietly, patiently, as if she were speaking to the piano alone. The audience, sensing the tension, fell into a hushed anticipation. The laughter faded, replaced by a quiet curiosity. What would she do? Could she possibly meet the expectations of this grand stage? Or would she stumble under the weight of the famous singer's shadow? She took a deep breath, her fingers brushing the keys gently before striking the first notes. The sound was soft, delicate, yet precise, filling the hall with a warmth that seemed to touch everyone present. The music was not loud or showy, but there was a sincerity in each note, a clarity that suggested years of quiet practice and deep understanding. Some in the audience leaned forward, their eyes widening as the simple melody began to grow into something more intricate and moving. Others exchanged surprised glances, whispering softly to one another, realizing that this was no ordinary performance. The singer, still standing near the microphone, raised an eyebrow. He had expected nerves, mistakes, perhaps even embarrassment, but what he saw instead was concentration, control, and a subtle power in the way she played. The music grew, notes weaving together like threads in a tapestry, capturing emotions that seemed to fill the room. The woman's fingers danced across the keys with a fluidity that was mesmerizing. Each chord and arpeggio carried a story, and though there were no words, the audience could feel the meaning behind each sound. The more she played, the more the atmosphere changed. The initial amusement in the singer's eyes began to shift, replaced by curiosity and perhaps a hint of respect. He had been so certain that mockery would unsettle her, that the crowd would side with him in their laughter. Instead, her music was quieting the room, drawing attention in a way that demanded focus rather than ridicule. Some of the audience members who had initially laughed at the singer's joke now sat in awe, captivated by the emotion emanating from the piano. They could sense the contrast between his confident arrogance and her humble mastery. As the piece progressed, the woman's expression remained calm, her eyes occasionally closing as if to better feel the music. The hall, once filled with anticipation and whispers, now seemed to exist solely for the music. People forgot the famous singer, the grandeur of the hall, even the passage of time. There was only the melody and the way it spoke directly to their hearts. The notes climbed and fell, soft and loud, tender and bold, telling a story of perseverance, of quiet strength, of a journey that had been long and often solitary. Even the singer, who had often thrived on being the center of attention, could not help but be drawn into the performance. He shifted slightly, crossing his arms, observing the technique and emotion in every movement of her hands. There was an undeniable skill here, a depth that went beyond technique or flashiness. The audience felt it, too. Murmurs of admiration began to ripple quietly through the crowd, not in mockery, but in genuine awe. Some people even leaned toward each other, whispering their disbelief at the unexpected talent before them. When she reached the final notes, she allowed them to linger, soft and fading, giving space for the audience to breathe and feel the impact of what they had just heard. There was a moment of silence, almost reverent, before the first applause began. It started softly, uncertainly, then grew into a wave of clapping and cheering that filled the hall. The audience rose to their feet, moved not just by skill, but by the sincerity and heart behind it. The singer, still on stage, could only watch. He had come expecting to be the star, to entertain and impress. Yet here was someone who had captured the hearts of everyone with nothing but dedication and music. The woman bowed slightly, acknowledging the applause with humility. She did not smile broadly or wave extravagantly. She had no need for dramatics. Her music had already spoken for her. The famous singer, in that moment, felt a mixture of surprise and admiration. He had underestimated her, thinking that a few words of mockery would diminish her presence. Instead, she had shown that true talent and quiet determination could shine brighter than arrogance or fame. As the applause continued, the woman gathered her music and prepared to step away from the piano. The audience's excitement lingered, many whispering among themselves about the incredible performance they had witnessed. The singer, still standing on the stage, realized that tonight was not just about his skill, but about the power of courage, dedication, and the ability to remain true to oneself even in the face of ridicule. It was a lesson that would stay with him, and with everyone in that hall, long after the final note had faded. After the first notes of her performance faded into the warm air of the hall, the audience remained seated, holding their breath as if they did not want to disturb the fragile magic she had created. The woman sat at the piano, her posture calm, her focus unbroken. Yet beneath that stillness, a quiet storm of nerves and anticipation raged. She was aware of every eye in the hall, every subtle shift in the crowd's attention, and every flicker of expression on the famous singer's face. He still stood near the microphone, arms crossed, lips pressed together in an unreadable line, trying to mask his growing surprise. The way she carried herself and the music she produced challenged his expectations, and though he would never admit it aloud, a small part of him began to feel something unfamiliar: respect. Memories of her own journey to the stage crept quietly into her mind as she prepared for the next sequence of notes. She remembered long hours spent practicing alone in small rooms, sometimes with barely enough light to see the keys. Rainy afternoons where the piano keys felt cold under her fingers and the wind rattled the windows of the tiny apartment she grew up in. She remembered the sacrifices, missing celebrations, forgoing outings with friends, pushing through discouragement, and never letting doubt win. Each note she played tonight was built on those years of dedication. She had worked hard not just to master technique, but to understand music in its most honest form. Each chord carried not just sound, but emotion, every melody a reflection of her soul. This quiet history of persistence gave her the strength to remain composed, even under the gaze of someone who had laughed at her courage. The audience, meanwhile, was slowly becoming enchanted. People shifted in their seats, leaning closer to hear the subtleties in her performance. There were no grand gestures, no flashy moves to steal attention, yet the music held them captivated. Some whispered among themselves, admiring the control and precision, noting how each phrase seemed carefully crafted, yet still breathed with life. Others watched the famous singer, curious to see if he would continue to mock or if he, too, had begun to feel the weight of her talent. It became evident that his previous arrogance had been shaken, that his laughter no longer held power in this room. The music was speaking for itself, and no words could compete with the authenticity it conveyed. She moved gracefully from one passage to another, her fingers striking keys with a balance of power and tenderness that seemed effortless. A soft trill here, a delicate arpeggio there, each sound resonating with emotion, touching something deep within the listeners. She allowed herself small pauses between sequences, brief moments of silence that gave the audience time to breathe, to absorb, and to reflect on the depth of what they were hearing. The famous singer began to shift slightly on the stage, frowning in concentration as he listened more closely. He had faced many musicians, many performers who had talent, but few who could combine skill and heart in such a natural way. This was different. He could see it not only in the music but in the quiet confidence of her demeanor, the calm intensity in her eyes. As the music flowed, the woman recalled advice she had received from her first teacher many years ago. He had told her that music was not just about playing notes, but about telling a story, about connecting with the person listening, about revealing a piece of oneself. She had taken those words to heart, and every time she performed, she tried to remember them. Now, on this stage, they felt truer than ever. She was telling her story, letting the audience into her world, and even the famous singer could not help but notice. Her music had a way of speaking without words, of evoking memories, emotions, and thoughts that were deeply personal yet universally understood. It created a quiet intimacy in the large hall, a connection between the performer and each person in the audience. The audience's reactions were subtle at first. A soft sigh from someone moved by a delicate note, a hand lightly touching the chest of a listener, as if to hold onto the feelings stirred by the melody. Then, gradually, small murmurs of appreciation began to ripple through the room. Unlike applause, which can sometimes be polite or expected, these whispers were spontaneous, born from genuine admiration. Some heads tilted, eyes closed, letting the music wash over them. Others leaned forward in their chairs, completely absorbed. The famous singer's usual dominance over the crowd was slipping. The room had shifted, and the balance of attention had tilted unexpectedly in her favor. She continued, seamlessly transitioning from soft, introspective passages to stronger, more confident sections, demonstrating not just skill but emotional depth. She played with a sense of story, a natural ebb and flow that drew listeners along, as if they were walking through chapters of her life. There was the quiet of solitude, the struggles of growing up, the determination to keep going, and the triumphs earned through effort and persistence. Each part of her performance conveyed not only technical mastery but also the human experience behind the music. The audience could feel it, and their attention was riveted. They were no longer spectators in a concert. They were companions on a journey, traveling through the highs and lows of her story through sound. The famous singer, standing awkwardly to the side, could feel a mixture of emotions rising within him. Pride, perhaps, at the skill evident in the performance, mingled with a flicker of discomfort at being overshadowed. He had entered the hall expecting to be the sole star, to charm and impress, and yet here was someone unassuming, quiet, who had captured not only the audience's attention but their hearts. He glanced at the audience, noting the smiles of admiration and the occasional tearful expression, and realized that tonight's performance was teaching him a lesson he had not anticipated. Humility was becoming unavoidable. The woman, aware only of the music and the story she was telling, felt a quiet sense of triumph. Not the kind that demands applause or recognition, but the kind that comes from knowing she had stayed true to herself, that she had honored her years of practice and devotion. She had faced the famous singer's ridicule without faltering, and now the music was speaking louder than any words could. She was not trying to compete with him or outshine him. She was simply performing with honesty and passion, allowing the authenticity of her talent to shine. As she reached the midpoint of her performance, a subtle shift occurred in the room. The audience, now fully engaged, seemed to move as one with the music. The air was charged with anticipation, each note creating ripples of emotion that spread quietly yet powerfully. The famous singer found himself listening with newfound focus, noting the way she controlled every element, every dynamic, every subtle nuance. He had always believed in the power of technical skill, in the ability to dazzle with precision and flair, yet here was a performance that transcended technique, that connected on a level that could not be measured by notes alone. The woman's expression remained serene, but inside, she felt a rush of emotion. She allowed herself to feel the impact of the music she was creating, to sense the effect it was having on the audience, and to acknowledge her own courage. There had been times when doubt had crept in, when the thought of performing in such a grand setting seemed impossible, but she had faced those fears. She had embraced her vulnerability and transformed it into strength. And now, in the quiet awe of the crowd, she could sense the truth of her journey being recognized. Slowly, she guided the music toward its conclusion for this part of the performance. The final notes of this segment were soft yet firm, lingering in the air as if reluctant to leave. The audience remained silent for a heartbeat longer, absorbing the impression left by the intricate and heartfelt passage. Then, soft applause began, tentative at first, but growing steadily as the realization of the woman's talent sank in. People were clapping, some whispering words of admiration, others nodding with appreciation. The famous singer, standing in quiet contemplation, could only offer a small, reluctant nod of acknowledgement. The performance had shifted the balance in ways he had not expected. For the woman, it was a moment of quiet satisfaction, not triumph in the conventional sense, but a deep and personal acknowledgement that she had held her ground, faced ridicule, and let her music speak for her. She allowed herself a small, controlled breath, knowing that the next part of the performance would continue to unfold, that the journey was not yet over. The audience, now fully engaged, waited with bated breath for what would come next, eager to follow the story through her hands, through the piano, and through the language of music that transcended words and connected hearts in a way only the most sincere performances could achieve. The woman's hands moved across the piano keys with a confidence that had grown stronger with every note. The music was no longer just a sequence of sounds. It had become a living, breathing story, unfolding in the grand hall for every listener to experience. Each note was deliberate, each pause intentional, and yet the flow remained smooth and natural. The audience, already mesmerized, leaned in closer, caught in the delicate balance between tension and release. There was a sense of anticipation in the air, as if everyone knew that the performance was reaching a moment that would be unforgettable. She shifted into a more complex section of her composition, moving from soft, reflective melodies to stronger, more dramatic sequences. Her fingers moved quickly and precisely, yet every note carried emotion, telling a story that transcended the simple mechanics of music. The sound filled every corner of the hall, vibrating in the wooden floor and echoing softly off the walls. The audience felt the music in their chests, their hearts responding to the crescendos and gentle decrescendos, as though they were part of the composition itself. Even those who had never played an instrument could sense the depth and care in every movement. The famous singer, standing to the side, watched with a mixture of surprise and growing admiration. He had performed in countless venues, had dazzled thousands with his voice, and had often been the center of attention, commanding the room with charisma and talent. Yet he had never seen a performance like this. It was not just skill or technique that made it remarkable. It was the sincerity, the courage, and the emotional truth that radiated from her playing. For the first time, he felt himself humbled by another performer, and he struggled to conceal the shift in his own pride. The audience had been captivated by his presence many times before, but now their attention was completely drawn to her. The woman, aware of the attention, remained focused. She was not performing for applause or validation, but for the music itself and for the story she wanted to tell. Memories of her early years at the piano surfaced. Hours spent practicing in solitude, learning from mistakes, and slowly discovering her own voice. She remembered teachers who had encouraged her to explore emotion, to feel the music, and to connect with the audience in a way that went beyond technical skill. All those lessons and experiences came together in this moment, guiding her hands, shaping her interpretation, and allowing her to pour herself into every note. The audience was silent again, this time in complete awe, as she transitioned into a particularly expressive section. She played with a fluidity that made the music feel effortless, though anyone who understood the instrument knew how much control and mastery it required. There was a subtle interplay of dynamics, the rise and fall of melody, the occasional pause that spoke volumes. Each phrase carried layers of emotion, drawing the listeners in and making them feel as though they were part of the story she was telling. People whispered to one another softly, remarking on the beauty and power of her playing. Some eyes were closed, tears glimmering, as the music seemed to reach deep into their hearts. The famous singer could no longer maintain his casual stance. He moved slightly closer, leaning forward, studying her hands, her posture, the way her expression reflected the music. He had often believed that confidence and showmanship were enough to command a room, but here he was witnessing a different kind of command, one that came from authenticity, focus, and the ability to communicate through the language of music. He felt a mix of humility and inspiration, a recognition that talent could shine in unexpected ways, and that there was always more to learn, more to appreciate beyond one's own skill. She played a particularly delicate passage, her fingers dancing lightly over the keys, producing notes that were soft yet full of feeling. It was a moment that seemed to hang in the air, drawing the audience into a quiet reflection. People shifted in their seats, leaning forward to catch every nuance, their breathing slowing as they became fully immersed in the experience. The famous singer watched the reactions carefully, noting the intensity of attention, the silent admiration, and the emotional impact of her music. He realized that this performance was not just about the sound, but about connection, about touching lives in ways that went far beyond technical mastery. That as she continued, the music grew bolder, building to a climactic section where power and emotion merged seamlessly. Her fingers moved swiftly yet gracefully, producing a sound that was both commanding and tender. The audience felt the energy and passion radiating from the piano, swept up in the waves of melody and rhythm. There was a sense of unity in the room, as if every listener were collectively holding their breath, riding the ebb and flow of the music. Even the famous singer found himself caught in the spell, unable to tear his eyes away from the performance. He recognized that he had been so focused on his own talent and presence that he had forgotten the power of music to speak for itself, to move hearts, and to create shared moments of awe and understanding. The woman's expression remained calm, but inside, she felt a surge of emotion. She allowed herself to be fully present in the music, to feel the intensity of the story she was telling, and to connect with the audience through each note. The piano became an extension of herself, a channel for the years of dedication, practice, and personal growth she had invested. She was not trying to compete or prove herself to the famous singer. She was expressing her truth, and that authenticity shone brightly. The audience responded instinctively, their attention unwavering, as they absorbed every nuance and every subtle emotional shift. The hall seemed to pulse with the music, each chord reverberating through the air, each phrase leaving a mark on the hearts of those listening. People sat spellbound, some wiping tears from their eyes, others leaning forward as if to be closer to the piano, to catch every delicate detail. The famous singer could feel the shift in energy, the way the audience had moved from curiosity to complete engagement, and he understood that the woman had captured something that he had rarely seen in his career, a genuine, unforced connection with every listener. He felt a mixture of admiration and introspection, recognizing that skill alone was not enough. The soul behind the music was what truly resonated. As she neared the end of this part of her performance, she began to ease the music into a softer, more reflective sequence. The pace slowed, the notes became more deliberate, and the intensity gave way to a gentle, lingering melody. It was a moment of quiet reflection within the larger story, a pause that allowed the audience to absorb the emotional journey they had been taken on. People held their breath, savoring the beauty and tenderness of the final notes, feeling the weight of the story in their own hearts. The famous singer, standing quietly, felt a rare and profound respect for her ability to move people so deeply without a single word. The final chord lingered, soft and resonant, fading slowly into silence. The audience remained still for a heartbeat, as if reluctant to break the spell. Then, as the last vibrations left the air, the first sounds of applause began, tentative at first, and then growing into a steady, enthusiastic ovation. The room erupted in appreciation, clapping and cheering for the skill, the emotion, and the courage displayed in the performance. People stood, some waving their hands in admiration, others whispering to neighbors about how unexpectedly powerful the experience had been. The famous singer could only watch, humbled, as the woman's quiet talent had captured the hearts of everyone in the hall. She allowed herself a slight bow, acknowledging the applause with grace and humility. There was no exaggeration, no showmanship, only a quiet, genuine recognition of the audience's appreciation. The applause continued, echoing through the hall, a mixture of admiration for her technical skill and the emotional resonance she had created. The famous singer, still standing, felt a shift within himself, an awareness that tonight's performance had not just been a display of talent, but a lesson in authenticity, humility, and the power of genuine connection. As she prepared for the next section, the atmosphere in the hall had transformed. The audience was no longer simply waiting to hear music. They were ready to follow her on the rest of the journey, to be moved, inspired, and connected through every note she played. The stage, once dominated by the anticipation of the famous singer's performance, now belonged to the woman and her music. The story she was telling continued to unfold, and the audience, entranced, was eager to listen, to feel, and to be a part of the extraordinary experience she had created. As the applause for her continued performance slowly faded, the famous singer stepped forward, preparing to take the stage with his own showcase of skill. The room shifted again, a familiar anticipation returning as people straightened in their seats, waiting to hear the voice that had drawn them to the hall in the first place. He adjusted the microphone and gave a charming smile, the kind that had always won over audiences, and yet tonight, it felt different. The energy in the room had changed. People had been touched by something more than technique. They had been moved by a story, by emotion, by authenticity. For the first time, he felt a flicker of uncertainty. He began his performance with a confident tone, his voice resonating clearly across the hall. Each note was strong, precise, and controlled. There was no doubt that he had immense talent. He had spent years perfecting his voice and his stage presence. Yet, as the first few lines of his song filled the space, a quiet tension lingered in the audience. Many had come expecting to be dazzled solely by his fame and skill, but their attention was divided. Their minds were still filled with the memory of the woman at the piano, her music lingering like a soft echo. They listened politely, they appreciated the technical brilliance, but something seemed absent. The connection, the deep emotional resonance that had captivated them earlier, was harder to find. The singer pushed himself harder, adding vibrato, extending notes, and showcasing vocal acrobatics. He commanded the stage, projecting confidence and skill. The audience responded with polite applause, acknowledging the precision and energy, yet it lacked the spontaneous, heartfelt reaction that the woman's performance had evoked. Some glanced at one another, comparing the experiences, and a subtle murmur of curiosity spread quietly through the hall. There was admiration for the voice, yes, but there was also a sense that something more meaningful had already been offered and that they were longing for it again. From the corner of the stage, the woman continued to watch, her hands resting briefly on the piano keys. She felt a mixture of calm and curiosity, observing how the famous singer approached the audience now, aware of the challenge she had presented without even intending to compete. She understood that this was part of his nature, to seek attention, to dominate the room, to impress. Yet, she also understood that what had been shared earlier was different. Music was not just about grandeur or technical display. It was about truth, connection, and the ability to touch hearts. She had shown that it was possible to hold the attention of a crowd without arrogance, simply through sincerity and dedication. As the singer reached a powerful crescendo, the audience's reactions varied. Some were impressed, nodding in appreciation, while others leaned back, comparing the emotional impact with the delicate, yet moving, performance they had just witnessed. A quiet introspection seemed to ripple through the room. The applause at the end of his first song was strong, but the warmth and intensity did not match the earlier ovation. He noticed it immediately, sensing the subtle shift and the way the audience had internalized the woman's music in a way that was difficult to compete with. It was a revelation, one that shook his perception of performance, recognition, and the power of genuine expression. The woman's calm demeanor contrasted sharply with the singer's visible effort to impress. She understood the lesson of the moment, even if he did not yet. True talent was not about dominance or showmanship alone. It was about the ability to create something meaningful, something that connected with others on a deeper level. As she observed him, she felt no resentment, only a quiet acknowledgement that every performer had a unique journey, and that tonight had become a shared experience rather than a competition. Her music had opened the door, and now, even the famous singer was learning that connection often matters more than display. As the singer continued through his set, his performance remained flawless technically. Each note was precise, each phrase well-practiced and executed with expertise. Yet the audience's attention was no longer singularly on him. Their minds drifted back to the piano, to the moments of emotion they had experienced earlier, to the sense of authenticity that had drawn them in. They were attentive, but their admiration was nuanced, layered with reflection. The singer, for the first time, felt the weight of expectation not just for skill but for heart, and it challenged him in a way he had rarely encountered. Gradually, he began to notice the subtle impact of the woman's presence. Not in a competitive sense, but in the way she had shifted the room's energy. He realized that performance was about more than controlling a stage or projecting confidence. It was about resonance, vulnerability, and the courage to allow the audience into one's story. He continued to sing, adjusting slightly, softening moments, paying more attention to emotional phrasing, seeking to connect beyond the notes. This awareness, new and humbling, changed the nature of his performance. He sang with skill, yes, but now with an emerging sensitivity to the listener's experience, inspired by the example he had just witnessed. The audience responded differently now. They were still attentive, still impressed by his mastery, but the earlier comparison was unavoidable. Many reflected on the contrast between the powerful, polished display of the singer and the heartfelt, genuine expression of the woman. Conversations shifted from admiration of raw talent to consideration of what made music truly moving. The hall was filled not just with sound, but with a shared exploration of artistry, emotion, and connection. The singer noticed it too, a subtle shift in the energy, and he felt the lesson sink deeper. The impact of music was not simply in the execution but in its ability to reach hearts and minds. The woman, though mostly silent during his performance, felt a quiet satisfaction in the unfolding moment. She had not sought to outshine, yet her earlier music had opened a door that challenged the very nature of performance in the hall. She understood that true talent could inspire humility and reflection even in those accustomed to adoration. Her own journey had been about growth, practice, and sincerity, and in this moment, it had become a mirror for others to see the value of authentic expression. She was present, observing and participating indirectly, allowing her influence to be felt without words or overt gestures. As the singer concluded his set, the audience rose with applause once more. This time, it was enthusiastic and polite, appreciative of the skill and presence he had shared, yet layered with a quiet acknowledgement of what had preceded it. He paused, breathing deeply, recognizing that tonight's performance had been more than a display of his own ability. It had been a lesson in connection, humility, and the profound effect of genuine artistry. He glanced at the woman at the piano, a small nod of respect forming, acknowledging that her courage and authenticity had changed the energy of the room and, in some measure, touched his own understanding of performance. The hall was alive with a mixture of admiration, reflection, and quiet energy as the next segment of the evening prepared to unfold. Both performers had contributed uniquely, the singer with his mastery and presence, the woman with her authenticity and heart. The audience had witnessed not just music, but an unfolding story of skill, courage, and emotional resonance. They had felt the contrast between showmanship and sincerity, between polished technique and heartfelt expression, and it left a lingering impression that would stay with them long after the final note had been played. The experience had transcended expectations, offering not only entertainment but a lesson in artistry, human connection, and the subtle power of authenticity in the world of performance. The applause that filled the hall gradually began to settle, but the energy in the room remained electric. The audience was alive with excitement and reflection, and it was clear that what they had witnessed was not just a performance, but an experience that had touched them deeply. The woman at the piano sat quietly, her hands resting lightly on the keys, a calm expression on her face. She allowed the moment to linger, letting the silence carry the weight of her performance before taking a small, graceful bow. The audience responded with a renewed wave of applause, standing to show their admiration and respect. Their response was genuine and heartfelt, a recognition of not just skill, but courage, dedication, and authenticity. The famous singer, standing nearby, watched her with a mixture of awe and contemplation. He had entered the hall expecting to be the center of attention, confident in his ability to command the audience through charm and talent. Yet, in this moment he felt something different. He had witnessed the quiet strength, precision, and emotional depth of her performance, and it had left him humbled. There was no animosity or competition in his gaze, only a newfound respect. He understood that the impact of music went beyond technical ability or showmanship. It was about heart, connection, and the courage to express oneself sincerely. The woman had demonstrated that, and he could not ignore it. As the audience continued to cheer, she carefully gathered her music sheets and stepped away from the piano bench. Each movement was measured, graceful, and composed. She did not rush to claim attention or bask in the applause. Her satisfaction came from having shared her music with honesty and integrity. People whispered among themselves, remarking on the incredible talent they had just witnessed. Some were moved to tears, others were inspired to reflect on their own experiences, and all were captivated by the emotional depth she had brought to the stage. The room felt full of warmth and admiration, a shared recognition that the evening had been exceptional. The famous singer finally stepped closer to her, his usual confident posture softened by reflection. He extended a hand in a gesture that was both sincere and respectful. The audience watched silently, sensing the significance of the moment. It was more than a simple acknowledgement. It was a recognition that talent, courage, and authenticity could inspire even the most experienced performers. He offered a small smile, nodding to her quietly, conveying a wordless respect that spoke louder than applause or praise. She returned the gesture with the same humility and calm, understanding that the exchange symbolized not rivalry, but mutual acknowledgement of artistry and dedication. The audience, witnessing the interaction, responded with renewed applause. It was spontaneous, heartfelt, and sustained, reflecting the emotional journey they had experienced that evening. People were not only appreciating the performances themselves but the human stories behind them. The years of practice, the courage to face challenges, the determination to remain true to oneself. The hall was filled with a sense of shared humanity, a collective understanding that art and music could transcend ego and bring people together through emotion and expression. The moment was not just about the performers, but about the impact of sincerity and passion in a world often focused on recognition and fame. The woman allowed herself a quiet smile, a reflection of the satisfaction she felt in sharing her music. It was not pride in the traditional sense, but a deep contentment in having expressed her story, having touched hearts, and having remained true to her own path. She knew that her journey had been long and challenging, but moments like this validated every sacrifice, every late night of practice, every doubt she had overcome. She had faced ridicule, uncertainty, and the pressure of performing before a large audience, Yet she had remained composed, letting her talent and dedication speak for themselves. The recognition she received was a reward not for showmanship, but for authenticity. The famous singer, meanwhile, took a step back, reflecting on what he had learned. His own performance had been technically impressive, but it lacked the depth and connection that her music had conveyed. He realized that skill alone could not inspire or move people in the same way that heartfelt expression could. This was a humbling experience, one that reminded him of the importance of sincerity, dedication, and emotional truth in art. He understood that the audience's reaction was not simply a measure of popularity or technical ability, but an acknowledgement of the courage and honesty that had been present on the stage that night. The lesson was clear, and it resonated deeply within him. The audience began to settle as the evening drew toward a close, but the energy remained palpable. People continued to discuss the performances, sharing impressions and reflecting on the emotions they had experienced. The hall had become more than a venue for music. It had become a space for connection, reflection, and inspiration. The woman and the famous singer had both contributed uniquely, and the audience recognized the value of both technical mastery and authentic expression. The evening had offered a rare opportunity to witness the interplay of skill, emotion, and courage, and it left a lasting impression on everyone present. As the performers prepared to leave the stage, the woman received a few final nods of respect and recognition from those around her. People offered quiet words of admiration, expressing how moved they had been by her music. She accepted these gestures with humility, understanding that her performance had created a meaningful impact not through flamboyance or ego, but through honesty, perseverance, and the courage to share her art. Her journey had been validated in a way that went beyond applause, touching the hearts of those who had listened and inspired reflection on the power of authenticity. The famous singer followed, offering a final glance of respect and acknowledgement. He had learned that true artistry was not simply about being the most dominant presence on stage, but about connecting with people through sincerity and emotion. His own understanding of performance had deepened, and he carried with him a new appreciation for the quiet power of dedication and authenticity. The evening had been a transformative experience, revealing the subtle yet profound ways that courage, heart, and skill could intersect to create something unforgettable. As the audience began to leave the hall, the energy of the evening lingered. Conversations reflected the impact of what had been shared, the emotions stirred, and the lessons observed. The woman's performance had become a lasting memory for many, a reminder of the importance of perseverance, authenticity, and the courage to express oneself fully. The famous singer's presence added contrast, highlighting the lesson that while skill and showmanship are important, it is the emotional resonance and connection with the audience that leave the most lasting impressions. The evening ended not with a dramatic finale, but with a quiet understanding that had settled over the hall. The woman's music, her humility, and her courage had transformed the space and the people within it. The famous singer, humbled and thoughtful, had witnessed a truth that would stay with him. Talent alone is not enough. Heart, authenticity, and the willingness to remain true to oneself are what create lasting impact. The audience departed inspired, carrying with them the memory of a performance that transcended expectations, reminding everyone that true artistry comes from a place of honesty, dedication, and emotional connection. The story of the evening would linger long after the music had stopped, a testament to the quiet power of courage and sincerity in the world of performance.